Good evening, everyone. Gordon Causey. Thank you for watching my miserable, pathetic, unmonetized YouTube channel. Thanks to everyone who has subscribed, to everyone who has hit the like button for me. Very much appreciated. If you've watched this channel before, you'll know that I typically start off by giving my dog a treat. So give me your paw. Paw, shake. Give me a paw. Lay down. Speak. There we go. That buys me peace. I can start. Quick little changes. I'm going to be endeavoring to keep my videos under 20 minutes, between 10 and 20, but no more than 20. And so I'm not going to be live and unscripted much anymore. When you're dealing with complex topics, I'm going to script out what I have to say. It means I take my eyes away from the screen, as it were. I write these out on my Facebook page, and I'll be reading them. Injecting commentary to the side, perhaps, but hopefully in that manner I can keep things condensed. So I wanted to talk about Israel and a brief history of Israel, and also the two-state solution, which many fail to recognize has already been attempted, and history will bear out how it has failed. So I'm going to get right into it. There is a lot of ignorance about modern-day Israel and how it came into being. It strikes me that there are a lot of people who think there was an autonomous Palestinian state, and that world Zionist Jews, Jews from around the world, these Zionists stormed in and basically stole the land. And there are lots of posts that go out on social media and memes, and they reach back into ancient history. And I don't think you have to go back that far to understand the current conflict. I mean, my starting point for this video is going to be the First World War, when the country that we now call Israel was a territory of the Ottoman or Turkish Empire. It was the southern part of their Syrian district, in point of fact. However, the label Palestine had been around since Roman times, since the second century, early in the second century. And it continued to be used in a similar way to how some still today refer to Mumbai as Bombay, despite the fact that Bombay, the name was changed to Mumbai almost 30 years ago. So after World War I ended, the British and French basically took over the region, and through something called the Sykes-Picot Agreement, they began dividing up what were formerly Ottoman lands, and they started creating nation states. And the volatile region of the Levant, what we now call Israel and Jordan, was eventually given over to the British in 1920. And it includes all of present-day Israel, as well as present-day Jordan and the West Bank and Gaza. So the region that Britain was given administrative control over, starting sometime in 1920, again, it included all of present-day Israel, as well as all of present-day the West Bank and Gaza, and all of present-day Jordan, because Jordan didn't exist in 1920. It didn't come into existence until 1921. And what happened in 1921, the British took part of their mandated territory of Palestine, and they created a Palestinian Arab state. It was given the name Transjordan because it was across the Jordan River. And this is an important and often forgotten piece of history regarding the British mandate for Palestine. After World War I had ended, the British and French hammered out the process of dividing up the conquered Ottoman territories. And there is far too much history to wade through about that whole Sykes-Picot Agreement. But the French and the British, even though they were allies, they were still in competition with each other because of vitally important oil and gas reserves. So the British mandate for, or the British mandate of Palestine, was settled on April 25th, 1920, at something called the San Remo Conference. And if you're interested, you can look into what happened in San Remo. You can look up the San Remo Conference. that conference was an extension of the Paris Peace Conference, which dealt specifically with the Middle East. So the Paris Peace Conference was to establish the peace after World War I. San Remo dealt specifically with the Middle East and ultimately with what would become known as British mandated Palestine. And the reason I think this brief period of history is often ignored is because the League of Nations, which was only created in January of 1920, and it would eventually morph or become the United Nations. The League of Nations did not formally adopt or recognize the British Mandate until July of 1922. Bureaucracy moved slowly, and there was a lot of things the League of Nations had to deal with post World War I, post the creation of the League. So while Britain was administering the mandated territory starting in April of 1920, the League of Nations didn't recognize the mandate for another 2+ years, but Britain was still managing the territory, administering it. It was theirs. And it was during this intermediary period when Britain established an Arab Palestinian state out of that mandated territory. The name this Palestinian territory was given was Transjordan, or if you want the English translation of the Arabic name, it was called the Emirate East of the Jordan. It was a British protectorate from the time of its creation in 1921 until 1946, at which point it gained its independence. So, in point of fact, the implementation of this much vaunted two-state solution had already started in 1921. The only thing, it was only half complete. The other half of the solution was the creation of a Jewish nation state, something the British had committed to going back to 1917 with their Balfour Declaration. So they have this territory, the British Mandate for Palestine, and they've committed to creating a Jewish nation state in this territory. But before doing that, they first created an Arab Palestinian state, which was called Transjordan, and later it became known as Jordan. So this Palestinian state of Transjordan, again, later they would change the name to Jordan, it comprised about 95,000 square kilometers of territory. Today's Jordan, after they lost the West Bank when they attacked Israel in 1967, is about the size of Indiana. If Jordan hadn't attacked and then lost the West Bank in the ensuing battle, then Jordan would be about 5,000 square kilometers bigger. It would be about 100,000 square kilometers, so a little bit bigger than what it is now. Contrast that with present-day Israel, which is only about 22,000 square kilometers. So it's about 1/4 of the land, the land that was under the British Mandate for Palestine, only about 1/4 of the land that was the British Mandate for Palestine ended up going to Israel. Jordan ended up with the lion's share of British mandated Palestine, and Israel ended up getting just a portion of what was left. And I would ask, why is this easily accessible and verifiable history overlooked or ignored? And I don't think there's one definitive answer, but I think in part it's simply been forgotten as it was more than 100 years ago. It's too long ago. So people tend to just ignorantly believe that Jordan always existed and that it wasn't created as a Palestinian Arab state in 1921, which is what happened. And to those who might take exception to me calling it a Palestinian Arab state, take note of the fact that the people living in what is now the West Bank, that this was Jordanian territory from the start when Israel's Green Line borders were established after the first Arab-Israeli War in 1949, what Israelis call the War of Independence. the residents of the West Bank, they were actually holding Jordanian citizenship even up until July 31st of 1988. And that's when Jordan formally ceded all its claim to this former territory of theirs, the West Bank. And if you look, this is why the Palestinian flag, it's a copy, a replica of the Jordanian flag. The only difference is that the star or sun has been removed from the red triangle. I mean, the Jordanian flag and the Palestinian flag, they're the same flag. The only difference is the Jordanian flag has, in the red triangle, it has a yellow sun or star. The Palestinian flag does not have that star or sun. So now let's fast forward to 1948. And all that remains of the British mandate is that small portion left over. And their mandate on that territory was due to expire on May 15th. And all attempts to negotiate dividing up what was left between creating another Arab state and a Jewish nation state had proven to be pointless, because the Arabs would not accept any Jewish homeland, no matter that all that was left was just this tiny little sliver of territory, no bigger than the state of New Jersey, not nearly the size of Indiana, which had already been given to the Palestinians for their new nation state of Jordan. So with the prospect of a peaceful and negotiated solution impossible, the Jews who were living in what remained of the British mandated territory, Palestine, they made a unilateral declaration of independence on May 14, 1948, the day before the British mandate was to expire. And for borders, they adopted the borders that had been proposed by the UN back in 1947. So they weren't even claiming all the remaining territory, just a portion of that tiny sliver. They were taking a portion of a portion. That's all they were claiming. And initially, in the days following their unilateral declaration, the powers that recognized Israel as a nation were the Soviets and the Americans, as well as some of their satellites like Poland did, Nicaragua did. But basically, it was the United States and the Soviets who recognized Israel as a nation state. However, on the very next day, on May 15th, 5 nations of the Arab League invaded, including the Palestinian nation of Jordan, which had just gained its independence from Britain. And the first Arab-Israeli war, what Israelis refer to as their War of Independence, it ended in July of 1949, and borders were established. There was a truce declared, and the borders are sometimes referred, even to this day, as the Green Line. And I want to compare the manner in which the United States became a nation and compare it with Israel. And the Americans also made a unilateral Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1776. However, recognition of the United States took a lot longer. They didn't have phones back then. Actually, an interesting thing, I never knew this, I just looked it up. Morocco was the first country to recognize the United States a year and a half after July 4th, 1776. Morocco recognized the United States as a nation in 1777 in December. France would do the same a few months later in February of 1778. In point of fact, when we get to the end of the American Revolution, it didn't end formally until September 3rd of 1783. Now, the British military had surrendered at Yorktown in October of 1781. However, the US and Britain were still technically at war with one another until the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1783. For my part, I view the year of Israel's establishment as an independent nation state to have formally been in 1949, once the truce agreements came into place. First, they had a truce with Egypt, and then subsequently with Lebanon, and then with the Palestinian state of Transjordan. It was still called Transjordan back then. And then finally with Syria. If we look at the United States around the time that it became a country and examine the demographics, we'll see that not everyone there was part of one distinct or even dominant ethnic group. There were those who were still loyal to the British Crown, and they were referred to as Empire Loyalists. Racially, in 1790, just after formally becoming a recognized nation, the U.S. was 80% white. We don't know with any degree of certainty how many First Nations people lived in the United States at this time. And it should be noted that this is before the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, when the U.S. territory at this time only comprised the original 13 colonies back in 1790. By 1860, the number of First Nations people in the expanded United States was only estimated to be somewhere around 40 to 50, maybe 60,000. But America in 1790, around the time it became a nation, included people of British, French, German, Spanish, Dutch, as well as other ethnic groups and nationalities. It was in around 4 million people, with 80% of them considered to be white. So like in Israel in 1948, 1949, the first Americans were of an incredibly mixed ethnic background. And the only thing that typically joined 80% of the population was a shared Christian faith. Jews likewise came to Israel in the decades leading up to its independence from all over the world and from all over the world after they gained their independence. They joined a smaller population who had maintained a presence in this region of the Levant going back to biblical times. Jews have never been completely removed from this area of the Levant. That's enough for now. I want to keep these short. I don't know how many people will make it to the end of this video. If you do and you want to put up a comment, I'm going to ask you to include in your comment the number 1947. You can write it as digits or letters so that I will know that you at least got to the end of the video. I think that a lot of people put up comments who don't make it to the very end. They listen until they hear something that triggers them, and then they comment and don't listen anymore. And I think that if they had listened to the whole thing, they'd find that their comment is actually addressed within the entire video. But anyway, thank you for watching. And again, as always, likes, shares, subscriptions, all that is appreciated. I've kept it under 20 minutes, so I'm going to end it now. I'll say God bless, and I'll have another video probably at some point, maybe this week, probably by the weekend, certainly. Anyway, good night.